to the end of days is Daniel Friedman, who represents a very strange amalgam, in fact, an apparent intense contradiction. This is a man of the highest science. This is the former CEO of Canada's most iconic aerospace company, the company that built the Canadarm. Daniel Friedman built the Canadarm with, of course, all of his engineers. And at the same time, he is a devout person, a believer, an Orthodox Jew, who has spent considerable energies in trying to reconcile the biblical account of creation with what we know of modern science, or what we think we know in the telling of the Big Bang, the rapid expansion, and the age of the universe, which has been set precisely at 13.7 billion years. So in making that effort, he wrote a book, and it was the subject of a previous talk. Now he's moved on to the end of days, and that means he is trying to give us a look ahead at what may lie ahead for all of creation. And he makes this bridge by, I guess, analyzing the unfolding apocalypse using a biblical clock formula. I hope I haven't confused you too much, but one way or another, please go up to the bookstore and get his books. Daniel Friedman. Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you, Moses. Wonderful introduction. Good afternoon. I hope he hasn't confused me, but we'll see what the creation story has to do with this topic in a minute. So the end of days has always been a very topical subject, but I'm getting a lot of help from our new leadership down south. He's really working on my book sales. If you're wondering he was doing anything good, it's good for that. But in all seriousness, even Isaac Newton spent a lot of his life working on this subject, figuring out what would happen and when it would happen. And judging by the amount of notes, he kept notes on his force laws, and he kept his notes on figuring out the end of days. There's more notes on the end of days on it. So it's been a very topical subject. Now, what is this whole thing about the end of days? Well, most religions, and certainly the Abrahamic religions of Islam, Christianity, and Judaism, have a kind of a linear process. We have a beginning, which is a creation story. It's followed through a period of human history, which we will talk about in a minute, and hopefully it'll help us clarify a lot of the questions that were raised this morning about whether we want to live forever, we don't want to live forever, we will live forever. Hopefully that'll be clear soon. And then it has an end. And that is typically called the end of days, or the Messianic era. And you've all heard the most famous prophecy about the end, that's of universal peace. It's amplified by the prophecy of Isaiah of beating our swords into plowshares and not waging war anymore. Now, there's another less-known prophecy, which I wasn't going to talk about, but that is of eternal life. So whatever you heard this morning is coming, and we'll talk about it. So the normal approach to trying to understand the end of days is to look at Scripture, and most of the Scripture related to the end of days is prophetic, so it's hard to understand, and to try and decipher it. And the unfortunate fact of that is that different religions have gotten to different answers, and even within a single faith, you get to different answers. So I've tried to take a bit of a more scientific approach using human history. And before we go into that, let's just go into the key things in the Bible that we know about the end of days that doesn't really come from prophecy so much. First of all, I said we had a beginning and an end. There's a purpose for the middle part, history. The purpose is to better this world. So we need to improve the world. And when we've done that, it will be in such a shape that God will want to dwell here. Now you say, well, how do you get to do that? Well, it's very similar. If you want to make your parents welcome at home, you need to kind of obey their rules, not your rules, when they visit you. At least I keep telling that to my daughter, but it doesn't work. We were given a bunch of rules. We were given the 7 Noahide laws for all of humanity. Now, it sounds simple. It's only 7. But really, when you work it out, it's a lot of laws. One of them is to have courts of justice. So that right there gets to a few thousand. And then the Jewish people were giving a little more detail, just because of a slightly different role in the process. But we got the rules. And if we obey those rules, we get there. We get to the end of days. We recognize God. And the good news is, well, the bad news is we haven't done it yet. The good news is there's a deadline. And the deadline is the year 6000. Now, that's the biblical year 6000, where year 1 is the birth of Adam. And then you count 6,000 years. So when you convert it to our common era calendar, it's the year 2240. A couple hundred years from now is the deadline. So obviously we haven't gotten there. We don't have universal peace, and we heard this morning we don't quite have infinite life yet. But we are guaranteed that it will happen. We don't know when. There's a guaranteed plan by which time God says it's time's up, it's going to happen. However, we can bring it early, and I will talk about that at the end, but my talk today will stick to the notion of what if we don't bring it early? What if we don't obey all these laws? When might this happen? So rather than deciphering prophecy, which I'm not good at, I'm going to use a different approach. And believe it or not, this approach is borrowed from producing Google Maps images, which is what I used to do for a living, partly. And I won't go into those details. But basically what we're going to do is, if you wanted to kind of predict where somebody was driving their car, you would get a map out with all the roads, and you would plot where the car was a day ago, 6 hours ago, 2 hours ago, 1 hour ago. And you'll say, there's a bit of a pattern here. I know the road's forward. Maybe he's going here. So you would have a plan, and you would have the person's history, the car's history. And the good news, as I said, the deadline is 2240, and we have thousands of years of history. So we got 90-something% of the data already. We just need the plan. We need to know what the map is. And what I'm suggesting to you is this kind of, don't be scared by this complicated array of maps there. It's a little easier than our metabolic process that we saw this morning. But what I have here is the first biblical year, year 1, the creation of Adam, running through to year 1000, 2000, 3000, all the way to the year 6000, which is 2240 CE. So these dates are the CE dates, if you want to just remember those. So what I'm proposing to you is that the plan for history consists of dividing the 6,000 years of history into 36 equal pieces, all of about 167 years. Why 6? Well, we have 6 days of creation, we have 6 days of the week, we have 6 years we work the land. I just told you we have 6,000 years of history. Each of those 6 is followed by a day of rest for the creation week, a day of rest for the week, a year for the sabbatical of the land, and in the case of history, universal peace, or rest, if you want. So the whole pattern is a pattern of 6 and 1, or 7. You will have noticed in Moses' book that he has a picture of the Sfirot, which are 10. In time, you only get 7 of those 10. These are divine emanations. So 3 don't show up in time. Only 7 show up, and that's why everything's in sevens. If you think about it, it makes absolutely no logic to have 7 anywhere. The moon doesn't go around the Earth 7 times, or the Earth rotates, or anything like that. It's not an astronomical thing like a year or a month. It's just 7. So that's what this pattern is all about. Now, the trick about this pattern is that we can examine it by looking at the days of creation, and we can try to pick out which points are really important points in history. Where is something really going to happen? And it turns out, from the analysis of the Kabbalah, that 3 and 6 are critical. 1 and 2 always build up to 3, and 4 and 5 always build up to 6. So in days 1 of creation and day 2 of creation, all kinds of things happen, but on day 3, the earth is made. Day 4 and 5, a lot of things happen, life and so on. But on day 6, humans are made. So it takes 3 steps. You'll see later, we had 2 temples in Jerusalem. We're supposed to have the 3rd temple, which is the completion. So 3 and 6 are very important. And also, there's many parts that are parallel in this pattern, and I can't review them all. But we have many parts that are parallel. So as you go through and do this analysis, you discover that there are 5 places in history where you can have a messianic end of days event. And I've shown them in gray. They happen in these years. Now, the good news is there's 5. The other good news is 4 have already happened. We are here, right? In this period right here, between 1913 and 2080. The year 5777. So we got 4 that have already happened. 1 I'm proposing will happen. So if these are completely parallel, in other words, the year 2333 is parallel to 3333, 2833, 3833, and so on, every year lines up. Then if we put these 4 pieces together, we should see the same pattern over and over again. And if we do see that same pattern, we can easily extrapolate to this point. Now, you won't know these numbers by heart because I didn't, but this is the period when the 10 Commandments were given. This is the period of King David and the first temple in Jerusalem. This is the period of the second temple in Jerusalem. This is a bit of a mess. We'll talk about it later. Things really went wrong. And this is my proposal for you for the end of days. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to put each of those periods side by side. I'm going to drop all the biblical years because they're confusing. I'm only going to put the CE years, the Common Era years, there for you. And this is what you get. So I got the first period here, the second, the third, the fourth, the end of days, and the dates for the end of days, only for this period. As I said, all these years are parallel. This is very summarized. In my book, it's year by year. You can see it. But what you see is an immediate pattern. Every period starts with something not so good. It's actually compared to labor. So the end of days is compared to a birthing process. The good news is the birth, which comes after the bad part. But the first part is labor, which is not bad, but it's painful, I'm told. And then that's preceded before that, we'll talk about that later, by pregnancy, which is the period we're in now. So, we had, in the case of Jewish history, there was slavery in Egypt, Jerusalem fell, the temples were destroyed, and there's a prophecy at the end of the days that something bad's going to happen. We don't know what it is. You can see the dates there. Then a messianic figure is born. Moses, David, these people you recognize, obviously that's going to match up with the Messiah. Immediately when that messianic figure is born, there's a battle. And it's always with the same descendants of the Amalekites. These were all descendants of the Amalekites. These are people that fight to keep divinity from the world. They don't fight for land. They don't fight for money. They just fight to keep divinity from the world. There's a prophesied war of Gog and Magog, which you may have heard. As soon as the battle is won, you build a temple because that's where God dwells. So we built a tabernacle, first temple, second temple. This poor fellow here, Bar Kokhba, lost the war with Rome, and that was the end of that period early. Obviously, this is going to correspond to the third temple. Then there's revelation, concurrent with building of the temple is revelation. We had the 10 Commandments. We had all kinds of revelations in the temple and publications of the law and so on. And it's prophesied that the Kabbalistic wisdom, which we know a tiny bit about today, will be revealed better. Now, the previous attempts all failed, so the leaders all died. This one died early during the war. And the prophecy is that this time it'll work. So those leaders will be resurrected, and so will everybody else. So this answers all the questions from this morning. So after the resurrection of the dead, everybody gets cured of all diseases, and everybody lives forever. And the reason it works and you don't get the anxiety that our philosopher speaker was talking about is because everything's changed for the better, and there's universal peace and all those good things. If you're alive at the time, no worries. You'll die for about a second, and you'll be right back. Just get a software upgrade, like a reboot. And you'll be bright as gone and completely cured. So we're definitely working on all the right things. Hopefully Moses next year will have a session on universal peace, and we'll be almost there. So I hope you can see that I haven't used any biblical prophecies. I've told you about the prophecies. They fit in this order. Other people don't think they're in this order. But I've just taken history year by year and plotted it on this pattern of 6 by 6, and you get this exactly repeating pattern. And these things happen almost aligned. Now, I started out by saying, people have done this before, it hasn't worked. What credibility do we have to this method? So the good news is that these parallel periods that I've shown you in gray are preceded by the pregnancy period or the preparation period in yellow. And all the yellow periods are also parallel. And in particular, these 4 yellow periods are parallel to this period here, which is 1913 to 2080. So we have 100 years of history to compare, and it's one heck of a history. Now, I've done this, and I'm not going to show you a similar table to the one I just showed you. It's in my book, and the reason I'm not going to do it is because the biblical history in this period is way more obscure than the Ten Commandments and King David and all those things, and it just won't make any sense because most of us, including myself, have to keep refreshing on it. But when you do the same analysis, you create the same table I just showed you, you line up every one of those 4 periods towards 1913 to today, you predict to the year the start of World War I, the end of World War II, the independence of Israel in 48, the annexation of Jerusalem in 67, the end of the Cold War. And those were all elements related to 2 biblical figures which kind of are represented in Western civilization. And then the period switches to bring in a 3rd figure, which is descendant from Ishmael, which is some of the Arab nations, and they come into the picture, and they come in around the equivalent of 1990, and you end up predicting some of the Iraq and 9/11 and so on. And unfortunately, in the end of days, all 3 factions collide in that famous war of Gog and Magog. Asia in general, which is a different descendant, doesn't seem to play a role in the biblical story. They kind of stay out of trouble. So when you do it, you can get to the same point. Now, I want to leave on a very positive note on this, and that is back to the first quote that I put up there. There's a set date. It's going to happen. Maybe that's it, what I've shown you. But we can hasten it, and we can make it happen tomorrow. In fact, we're running a bit late today. I was worried that I might not get a chance to speak, since everybody's been so good. But in all seriousness, the good news, I told you at the beginning, we have to obey all these commandments. The good news is we're given a shortcut, several shortcuts, and they all more or less embody a single message. Be nice. Be kind to other people. Do charity. Do good deeds. And you can shortcut the complicated, not that we should disobey the Ten Commandments, but you can shortcut that. Thank you very much.
So Daniel, you say there's a hard stop in that 6,000th year, which translated into CE, our calendar, is about 250 years from now.
Right.
So hard stop doesn't sound that positive. And extrapolating from many of the wonders we've heard about over the years on this stage, I do see a parallel in that one line of thought says that we're going to get to a hard stop because we're going to kill ourselves, because our nuclear weapons and our warlike nature will eventually lead to a conflagration. This is an answer given by people who pose the question, if there is other life on planets, how come we haven't heard from anybody? And the speculation is that when civilizations get advanced enough, they get mean enough and acquire weapons powerful enough that they can wipe themselves out. The other parallel stream, a little more positive, but also leading to the eclipse of humanity, is that we lose ourselves to our robots, to our machines, that their intelligence overwhelms ours, that we begin to incorporate technologies and become some new kind of entity. how does all of this play into your prophecy? Because to me, it seems alarmingly lined up. I mean, 200, 250 years, it seems kind of right that by that time, we'll either have blown ourselves up or we'll have transmogrified into some other kind of creature.
Well, the Bible is quite a bit more positive than both of those.
Okay.
And it says that the things we're experiencing today are going to happen. We're going to have science that allows us to prolong our life, to have peace. And it says that we're going to figure it out. Sometimes it thinks that we're going to use all that technology against ourselves, but the Bible is predicting that we're going to figure it out. We might have another big war. It might take another war to figure it out. But it says we're going to figure it out. We're going to figure out how to make peace. We're going to figure out how to be healthy and live forever, and how to worry about other things that we worry about today, like envy and lust and those things. And that is going to happen in that time frame. And it actually, the pregnancy and labor thing is exactly how it looks unsettling. And it predicts that. It predicts that. I mean, I didn't go through all the prophecies because I want to be more scientific, but it predicts that we're going to be in a very uncertain time now, but it will
We're talking
flip over.
about pregnancy now.
Pregnancy
this is
now,
the moment.
and then labor. But when I was born in Chile, and they didn't have any of the labor business there. You just cesarean. That's what my mother did. Popped right out. So that's what we got to do. We got to be kind, and we'll just pop right out.
Well, from your lips to God's ear. Thank you so much.
Thank you.